Elena Vasquez had never imagined that her morning coffee would be interrupted by the sound of artillery shells whistling overhead. The young communications specialist sat in the makeshift command post, her hands steady despite the chaos erupting around their position. At 23, she was the youngest member of the 12th Infantry Division's Advanced Reconnaissance Unit, stationed near the Krasny Most Bridge in eastern Ukraine. The bridge itself was nothing spectacular to look at, just concrete and steel spanning a modest river. But military intelligence had identified it as a critical supply route that enemy forces would need to advance toward the capital. Command had been clear in their orders. Hold the bridge at all costs until reinforcements arrived. Captain Rodriguez, a weathered veteran with 20 years of service, gathered the unit around a tactical map spread across an ammunition crate. His finger traced the river's path as he spoke. Intelligence suggests enemy armor will attempt to cross here within 48 hours. Our job is to make sure they don't get the chance. Elena studied the faces of her fellow soldiers. There was Martinez, the explosives expert who always carried too many pictures of his newborn daughter. Thompson, the sniper who could hit a target from 800 meters but couldn't remember to shave. Jackson, their medic, who had saved more lives than he could count, but still flinched at the sound of incoming rounds. Petrov, the heavy weapons specialist who spoke little English, but communicated perfectly through hand signals and shared cigarettes. 12 soldiers in total, each with their own specialty, each with their own reasons for being there. Elena's role was crucial. She would maintain communications with headquarters, coordinate air support if needed, and ensure that intelligence flowed both ways. Her equipment included radio systems, satellite communication gear, and backup devices that could mean the difference between successful coordination and deadly isolation. The captain's plan was methodical. They would establish defensive positions on both sides of the bridge, with primary focus on the eastern approach where enemy forces were expected. Elena would position herself in the small concrete observation tower that overlooked the entire span. From there, she could coordinate their defense and maintain contact with command. As the sun began to set on their first day, Elena climbed the narrow stairs to her assigned position. The tower was cramped, barely large enough for her communication equipment and a sleeping bag. Through the small windows, she could see her teammates establishing their positions. Martinez was placing charges at strategic points along the bridge structure, a last resort if their defense failed. Thompson had found a perfect sniper's nest in the ruins of an old farmhouse. The others were digging in, creating firing positions that would give them overlapping fields of fire. The night passed quietly, broken only by distant thunder that might have been artillery or might have been an approaching storm. Elena maintained regular contact with headquarters, reporting their status every 2 hours as ordered. Each transmission brought the same response. Hold position, reinforcements en route. Dawn brought with it an ominous silence. The usual sounds of military activity from the rear areas had stopped. Elena tried raising headquarters on multiple frequencies, but received only static in response. She switched to the emergency channel and tried again. Nothing. "Captain," she called softly into her headset. "I've lost contact with HQ. All frequencies are dead." Rodriguez's voice crackled back immediately. "Equipment malfunction?" Elena ran through her diagnostic procedures, checking each piece of equipment systematically. Everything appeared to be functioning normally. She tried different antennas, different power sources, even the backup radio. The silence continued. "Negative, sir. Equipment's operational. But I'm not picking up any military traffic on any frequency." There was a long pause before the captain responded. "Keep trying. Maybe atmospheric conditions, or they've moved their command post." But Elena knew better. She had been trained to recognize the difference between equipment failure, atmospheric interference, and communication blackouts. This felt different. This felt like the kind of silence that comes when there's no one left to talk to. The second day brought the first signs of enemy movement. Thompson reported vehicles moving along the distant tree line, too far away to engage, but close enough to confirm that contact was imminent. Elena continued her attempts to reach headquarters, expanding her search to include any friendly forces within range. She picked up civilian radio stations from towns hundreds of kilometers away, but no military communications. As afternoon approached, the enemy began their probe. A small reconnaissance unit appeared at the far end of the bridge, testing their defenses. Thompson's rifle spoke once, and the enemy soldiers quickly withdrew. But they had seen what they needed to see. Elena's stomach tightened as she realized the implications. They were alone, cut off from any support, facing an enemy force of unknown size with no hope of reinforcement. The bridge they had been ordered to defend was about to become their tomb. That evening, Captain Rodriguez called for a team meeting in the small bunker they had constructed near the bridge's western end. Elena made her way down from the tower, carrying her portable radio in case headquarters tried to make contact. "Situation report," Rodriguez began without preamble. "Elena, any word from command?" "No, sir. 47 hours of silence. I've tried every frequency, every protocol. Either our entire chain of command has been eliminated, or something catastrophic has happened to our communications infrastructure." Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "What about those reinforcements?" Rodriguez looked at each of them in turn. "We have to assume they're not coming. We have to assume we're on our own." The weight of those words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Jackson was the first to speak. "So, what are our options?" "We follow our orders," Rodriguez said firmly. "We hold this bridge until we're relieved or until we can't hold it anymore." Petrov spoke up in his heavily accented English. "And if we cannot hold?" Everyone looked at Martinez, who carried the detonator for the explosive charges. He patted his vest pocket unconsciously. "Bridge goes boom. No one crosses." Elena found herself thinking about her family back home, about the letters she had written but not yet sent. She thought about the communication protocols she had memorized, the procedures for emergency contact, the backup systems that were supposed to ensure that no unit was ever truly alone in the field. But they were alone now, more alone than any training had prepared them for. The third day began with artillery. The first shells landed short, throwing up geysers of dirt and river water. Elena pressed herself against the concrete walls of her observation tower as the bombardment intensified. Through the narrow window, she could see her teammates taking cover in their prepared positions. The enemy was probing their defenses systematically, walking artillery fire closer to their positions with each salvo. Elena tried desperately to contact any friendly forces that might be able to provide counter-battery fire, but her calls met only silence. When the artillery stopped, the silence was even more ominous than the explosions had been. Elena peered through her scope toward the eastern approach and felt her blood freeze. Armored vehicles were moving into position, more than their small unit could hope to stop. She keyed her radio to the command frequency. "All stations, this is Overwatch. Multiple armored vehicles approaching from the east. Count at least 6 tanks plus supporting infantry." Rodriguez's voice came back steady and calm. "Copy, Overwatch. All stations, prepare for contact." Elena watched through her scope as the enemy formation advanced. She could see infantry soldiers moving alongside the tanks, their weapons ready, their movements coordinated and professional. This wasn't a probe anymore. This was the real attack. The first shots came from Thompson's position. His rifle cracked twice, and Elena saw 2 enemy soldiers drop. The battle for the bridge had begun. What none of them knew, as Elena continued trying desperately to reach the outside world, was that the war itself had taken a dramatic turn. The front lines had collapsed, armies had been routed, and communication networks had been systematically destroyed. Their unit hadn't been forgotten. Their entire military structure had ceased to exist. But Elena Vasquez, alone in her concrete tower with only her radio equipment and her training, continued to call out into the void, believing that somewhere, someone was listening. Someone was coming to help them hold the bridge that had become the center of their rapidly shrinking world. The battle erupted with a ferocity that shook Elena's concrete tower to its foundation. Enemy tank shells screamed overhead while machine gun fire raked their positions in deadly patterns. From her elevated position, Elena could see the entire battlefield unfold like a terrifying chess match where every wrong move meant death. Thompson's sniper rifle continued its methodical work from the farmhouse ruins. Elena watched through her scope as enemy soldiers fell one by one, but for each one that dropped, 3 more seemed to take their place. The enemy had brought overwhelming numbers, and they pressed forward despite their casualties. "Overwatch, this is Martinez," came the explosives expert's voice through her headset, strain evident in his tone. "They're trying to flank us from the south. I can see infantry moving through the trees." Elena adjusted her scope and confirmed Martinez's report. A full squad of enemy soldiers was working their way along the riverbank, trying to get behind their defensive positions. "I see them, Martinez. Jackson, can you shift position to cover the southern approach?" Jackson's response was immediate. "Moving now, Overwatch." The medic abandoned his prepared position and scrambled toward a cluster of concrete barriers that would give him a clear field of fire toward the riverbank. Elena watched nervously as Jackson sprinted across open ground, enemy bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. He almost made it. The sniper's bullet caught Jackson just as he reached the barrier. Elena saw him stumble, saw the red bloom spreading across his chest, watched him try to raise his rifle before collapsing behind the concrete wall. "Jackson's down," Elena reported, her voice somehow steady despite the ice in her veins. "Jackson's down." "Can you see his condition?" Rodriguez asked. Elena focused her scope on the medic's position. Jackson wasn't moving. The red stain on his uniform was growing larger. "He's not responsive, Captain. He's not moving at all." The loss of their medic meant that any future wounds would likely be fatal. Elena felt the first real stab of fear, not for herself, but for what it meant for their mission. They were already outnumbered and outgunned. Now they had lost their lifeline. Petrov's heavy machine gun opened up from his position on the western side of the bridge, its distinctive sound cutting through the chaos. The big Russian was laying down devastating suppressive fire, forcing the enemy infantry to take cover. But Elena could see that the tanks were still advancing, their armor proof against small arms fire. "Martinez," Elena called. "How long do you need to prep the charges?" "Give me 3 minutes," came the reply. "But I need covering fire to get to the detonator position." Elena studied the battlefield through her scope. The primary detonator was positioned in a concrete bunker near the center of the bridge, but getting there would require crossing 40 meters of open ground under direct enemy observation. "Thompson," Elena called to their sniper, "can you provide cover for Martinez?" Thompson's rifle cracked in response, and Elena saw an enemy soldier who had been drawing a bead on Martinez fall backward. The sniper was doing his job, but Elena could see that his position in the farmhouse was becoming untenable. Enemy soldiers were working their way closer to his building. Martinez made his move, sprinting from cover toward the detonator bunker. Thompson's rifle provided steady covering fire, picking off enemy soldiers who tried to target the running explosives expert. For a moment, Elena thought they might actually pull this off. Then the tank shell struck Thompson's position. The explosion turned the farmhouse into a cloud of dust and debris. Elena stared in shock at where her teammate's position had been just seconds before. There was nothing left but rubble and smoke. "Thompson!" Elena called into her radio. "Thompson, report!" Silence answered her call. Their sniper was gone. Without Thompson's covering fire, Martinez found himself pinned down just 20 meters from the detonator. Enemy soldiers were closing in on his position from multiple directions. Elena could see muzzle flashes getting closer to where Martinez had taken cover. "I can't reach the detonator," Martinez reported, breathing hard. "Too much fire. I'm cut off." Elena made a decision that would haunt her for years afterward. She abandoned her communication equipment and grabbed her rifle. Her orders were to maintain communications and coordinate the defense. But with their sniper down and Martinez pinned, someone had to provide covering fire. She took careful aim through the tower's window and began engaging enemy soldiers who were advancing on Martinez's position. Elena had always been a good shot during training, but shooting at human beings was different from shooting at targets. Her hands trembled with each shot, but she forced herself to keep firing. Her intervention worked. The enemy soldiers seeking to flank Martinez were forced to take cover, giving the explosives expert the breathing room he needed. Elena watched as Martinez low-crawled toward the detonator bunker, moving from cover to cover. But her shooting had also revealed her position to the enemy. Tank turrets began turning toward the observation tower, and Elena realized with growing horror that she had made herself a target. The first tank shell missed the tower by mere meters, the explosion showering Elena with concrete fragments. She pressed herself against the floor as a second shell struck the tower's base, and the entire structure shuddered ominously. "Elena!" Rodriguez's voice crackled through her abandoned headset. "Get out of the tower! It's not going to hold!" But Elena couldn't abandon her position. From the tower, she was the only one who could see the entire battlefield, the only one who could coordinate their remaining defense. If she left, they would be fighting blind. Martinez finally reached the detonator bunker and began preparing the explosive charges. Elena could see him working frantically with the controls, his training taking over despite the chaos around him. Once those charges were set, they would have the option to deny the bridge to the enemy, even if they couldn't hold it themselves. Petrov's machine gun fell silent. Elena swung her scope toward his position and felt her heart sink. The big Russian was slumped over his weapon, blood pooling beneath him. Enemy soldiers were already advancing on his abandoned position. That left only Elena, Captain Rodriguez, and Martinez still fighting. 3 soldiers against an enemy force that seemed to grow larger by the minute. "Charges are ready," Martinez reported. "I can blow the bridge on your command." Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. "Negative. Orders are to hold the bridge, not destroy it. We hold until relieved." Elena wanted to scream at the radio. What reinforcements? What relief? They had been alone for days, cut off from all communication, and their unit was being systematically eliminated. But military discipline held, even in the face of certain death. The enemy tanks reached the eastern end of the bridge and began crossing. Elena could hear the rumble of their engines, could feel the vibrations through the tower's concrete structure. Once those tanks crossed, the battle would be over. Rodriguez made his last stand at the western barricades, his assault rifle chattering as he tried to stop the advancing infantry. Elena watched through her scope as her captain fought with the desperate courage of a man who knew he was going to die, but refused to give up. A tank shell ended Rodriguez's resistance in a flash of fire and smoke. Elena found herself alone in the tower, the sole surviving member of her unit, listening to the sound of enemy tanks crossing the bridge they had been ordered to defend. Martinez was still alive in the detonator bunker, but cut off and surrounded with no way to communicate. She picked up her headset and tried one more time to contact headquarters, to report their situation, to request the orders that might allow Martinez to destroy the bridge. But the radio brought only static, the same empty silence that had haunted them for 3 days. Through her scope, Elena watched enemy soldiers advancing on Martinez's position. She saw him raise his hands in surrender, saw them drag him from the bunker, saw them examine the detonation controls with professional interest. Then she saw one of the enemy soldiers raise his weapon and shoot Martinez in the head. Elena Vasquez was now truly alone, the last defender of a bridge that was already lost, the sole survivor of a unit that had followed orders until the very end. As enemy soldiers began searching the area for any remaining defenders, Elena realized that her real fight for survival was just beginning. The war had moved on without them, leaving them stranded in a battle that no longer mattered, defending a position that had already been forgotten. But Elena was still alive, still armed, and still determined to complete her mission, even if she no longer knew what that mission was supposed to accomplish. In the growing darkness, as enemy forces consolidated their control of the bridge, Elena Vasquez prepared for the longest night of her life, alone in a concrete tower that had become both her fortress and her prison. Elena spent 4 days alone in the observation tower after the battle ended, existing on emergency rations and rainwater collected in her helmet. The enemy forces had established checkpoints at both ends of the bridge, but hadn't thoroughly searched the tower itself. Perhaps they assumed no one could have survived the bombardment, or perhaps they were simply too busy consolidating their advance to worry about stragglers. During those 4 days, Elena maintained her vigil with the dedication of a soldier who had forgotten how to be anything else. She continued trying to raise headquarters on every frequency, following communication protocols even when protocol had become meaningless. Every 2 hours, she transmitted her position report to a command structure that no longer existed. Sleep came in brief, nightmare-filled intervals. Elena would doze for minutes at a time, only to wake in a panic, grabbing for her rifle as phantom artillery shells whistled through her dreams. The silence between her radio attempts was worse than the chaos of battle had been. In combat, at least there had been purpose, clear objectives, teammates to protect. Now there was only emptiness and the growing realization that she might die alone in this concrete box. On the 3rd day, Elena began talking to her dead teammates. She found herself explaining tactical situations to Thompson, asking Martinez about explosive placement, requesting medical advice from Jackson. The conversations felt real enough that she sometimes waited for responses that would never come. It was Petrov who saved her sanity. As Elena sat staring at her radio equipment, trying to decide if she had enough battery power for another transmission attempt, she remembered the big Russian's habit of carrying tea bags in his vest pocket. He had insisted that proper tea could solve any problem, a philosophy that had seemed absurd during combat, but now felt like wisdom. Elena made her way carefully down from the tower under cover of darkness and searched Petrov's body. His vest pocket contained 3 tea bags and a small tin of sugar. She also found his emergency water purification tablets and a protein bar that he had apparently been saving. That night, Elena sat in the tower drinking tea made with rainwater and purification tablets, talking quietly to Petrov's memory about the war and their orders and the bridge that had cost so much to defend. The tea was terrible, but it was warm, and it reminded her that she was still human, still alive. On the 4th day, everything changed. Elena was monitoring radio frequencies when she heard something unexpected, a transmission in English, not the enemy's language, not the desperate calls for help from isolated units, but crisp, professional English with an American accent. Any station, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United Nations Investigation Team. We are conducting a survey of the Krasny Most area. Any surviving military personnel, please respond. Elena stared at her radio for a full minute before reaching for the transmit button. Her hand shook as she keyed the microphone. United Nations Investigation Team, this is Communications Specialist Elena Vasquez, 12th Infantry Division. I am the sole survivor at Krasny Most Bridge. The response came immediately. Elena Vasquez, this is Colonel Mitchell. Can you confirm your position and status? I am in the observation tower on the western side of the bridge. I have been maintaining position for 7 days since losing contact with headquarters. I am uninjured but low on supplies. There was a long pause before Colonel Mitchell's voice returned, and when it did, Elena detected a note of disbelief. "Elena, I need you to confirm. Are you saying you have been alone at that position for a full week?" "Yes, ma'am. Following orders to hold the bridge until relieved." Another pause, longer this time. "Elena, I need you to stay exactly where you are. We are coming to get you. Do not engage any personnel approaching your position. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am. Will reinforcements be arriving to retake the bridge?" The silence stretched so long that Elena wondered if she had lost the connection. When Colonel Mitchell finally responded, her voice was gentle in a way that made Elena's stomach clench with dread. "Elena, the war ended 3 days ago. There will be no reinforcements." Elena stared at her radio, trying to process words that made no sense. The war ended? How could the war have ended when they were still defending the bridge? How could the war have ended when she was still following orders, still maintaining position? "I don't understand, ma'am. My orders were to hold this position until relieved. I have not been relieved." "Elena, listen to me carefully. Your entire division was reported missing in action 6 days ago. Military command assumed all personnel were casualties. No one knew there were survivors." The radio slipped from Elena's numb fingers. Missing in action. Assumed dead. No one knew there were survivors. Elena Vasquez had been defending a bridge that no longer mattered, following orders from commanders who thought she was dead, maintaining position in a war that had ended while she sat alone in her concrete tower. 2 hours later, Elena heard vehicles approaching from the west. Through her scope, she could see military vehicles flying United Nations flags. Her rescue had arrived, though she was no longer certain she wanted to be rescued. Colonel Mitchell turned out to be a tall woman with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen too much war. She climbed the tower stairs slowly, giving Elena time to adjust to the idea of human contact after a week of isolation. "Elena?" she said softly as she reached the top of the narrow stairs. "I'm Colonel Mitchell." Elena stood at attention, her rifle at port arms, every inch the professional soldier despite her ragged appearance. "Ma'am, Communications Specialist Elena Vasquez reporting. Position held as ordered." Colonel Mitchell looked around the small tower, taking in the radio equipment, the empty ration packages, the careful way Elena had organized her supplies and maintained her weapons. "At ease, soldier. You've done enough." But Elena couldn't relax, couldn't stand at ease. "Ma'am, I request clarification of my orders. Are we abandoning the position?" "Elena," Colonel Mitchell said gently, "there are no more orders. The war is over. Your job is finished." Elena stared at the colonel, trying to understand how a job could be finished when it felt so incomplete. Her teammates were dead, the bridge had fallen to enemy forces, and she had failed to maintain communication with headquarters. How could that be considered finished? "What about my team?" Elena asked. "What about Rodriguez and Martinez and Thompson? What about Petrov and Jackson and the others?" Colonel Mitchell's expression grew even sadder. "They're being listed as killed in action, heroes who died defending a strategic position." "But we lost," Elena said quietly. "We lost the bridge. The enemy took it." "You held it for 6 days against overwhelming odds," Colonel Mitchell replied. "The delay allowed civilian populations to evacuate and gave our forces time to establish defensive positions elsewhere. Your sacrifice mattered, even if it didn't feel like victory." The word sacrifice hit Elena like a physical blow. She had survived when her teammates died. She had lived while they sacrificed everything. The guilt crashed over her with the force of a tsunami, leaving her gasping and shaking. Colonel Mitchell seemed to understand. She had seen survivors' guilt before, had witnessed the particular hell that comes with being the only one to walk away from a massacre. "Elena, I need you to listen to me," she said firmly. You survived because you followed orders, because you maintained position, because you did your job when everything else fell apart. Your teammates would not want you to feel guilty for being alive. But Elena wasn't sure she believed that. She wasn't sure she believed anything anymore. The journey back to friendly territory took 3 hours by convoy. Elena sat in the back of an armored vehicle, still clutching her rifle, still trying to understand how the world had changed so completely while she defended a single bridge. Colonel Mitchell explained the broader strategic situation during the drive. The enemy's advance had been stopped at multiple points along the front. The war had ended not with dramatic battles, but with negotiations, ceasefires, and political agreements that Elena had never heard about from her concrete tower. The bridge they had defended had indeed been important during the early days of the fighting. The delay imposed by Elena's unit had allowed civilians to escape and military forces to regroup, but the strategic value of the position had diminished as the war shifted and new front lines were established. "Your unit bought time," Colonel Mitchell explained. "Time for thousands of people to reach safety. That's not a failure, Elena. That's a mission accomplished." But Elena struggled to see it that way. Mission accomplished felt like something that should come with victory parades and medal ceremonies, not with body bags and survivor's guilt. At the processing center, Elena underwent medical evaluation, psychological assessment, and extensive debriefing. Military investigators wanted to know everything about their communication blackout, their isolation, their final battle. Elena answered every question with mechanical precision, providing details and observations with the thoroughness of a professional soldier. The investigation revealed that Elena's unit had been the victim of a perfect storm of military misfortune. Communication networks had been systematically targeted by enemy cyber warfare, creating dead zones where units lost contact with command. The rapid shift in front lines had isolated several units, but most had been able to withdraw or surrender when they realized their positions had become untenable. Elena's unit, following strict orders to hold their position at all costs, had remained in place when retreat might have saved lives. They had done exactly what they were supposed to do, which made their losses both heroic and heartbreaking. Psychologists told Elena that her guilt was normal, that survivor's syndrome was a common response to traumatic loss. They prescribed therapy and medication and time to heal. They assured her that the memories would fade, that the guilt would lessen, that she would learn to live with what had happened. But Elena wasn't sure she wanted the memories to fade. Thompson's dry humor, Martinez's pictures of his daughter, Jackson's gentle hands treating wounded soldiers, Petrov's terrible tea and kind heart, Captain Rodriguez's steady leadership. These memories felt like the only thing she had left of her teammates. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez received the Silver Star for her actions at Krasny Most Bridge. The citation praised her exceptional valor and dedication to duty while serving as the sole survivor of her unit during extended combat operations. The medal ceremony was attended by military dignitaries and war correspondents who wanted to interview the woman who had held a bridge alone for a week. Elena accepted the medal with the same mechanical precision she had shown during her debriefing. She answered reporters' questions about duty and sacrifice and heroism. She posed for photographs and shook hands with generals and told everyone that she was honored to serve her country. But late at night, in the quiet of her apartment, Elena would sit by her radio and tune through the frequencies, listening for voices that would never answer again. She would make terrible tea with tap water and sugar, talking quietly to ghosts about a bridge that had mattered for 6 days and then been forgotten by history. Elena Vasquez had survived the war, but part of her remained forever in that concrete tower, maintaining position, following orders, waiting for reinforcements that would never come.